the conflict. We gave them the coordinates of all of our facilities in Gaza. The schools are clearly marked like any school anywhere in the world. The famous blue UN colors. And in addition, a third source of where the school was and being clearly marked and all that, one assumes that when an army is doing house-to-house fighting in an area like this, it's got more detailed maps than anybody about which building is what. So, you know, three sources, GPS coordinates, the fact that it was marked, and one assumes very accurate IDF maps to suggest that the IDF knew exactly what this building was.
And what about the other school that we talked about yesterday? There were two different schools.
Well, there was an attack at a school called Asma a couple of nights back at 11:30 at night when 3 refugees went out into the compound of the school. They actually went to the toilet block in order to use the facilities. On their way back at 11:30 at night, there was a direct strike on the school compound, and they were killed tragically in that. So again, we're calling for an impartial investigation. We want the facts to come out. We want accountability. If anyone is accused of violating international humanitarian law, then we want an impartial investigation, and we want those found guilty of violating IHL to be brought to justice, because ultimately a sense of justice will be one of the many elements of the bedrocks of future and durable peace. So justice, we need justice, even though that sounds crazy, as the guns are still blazing in Gaza.
It's not clear whether the attack on the Jabalia refugee camp school has led to Israel changing its position. And I want to ask Christopher Gunness of UNRWA if you see them changing their position at all and saying they're going to open a, quote, humanitarian corridor for 3 hours a day. What does that mean?
I can't tell you what changed the mind of Mr. Olmert. You need to ask him himself. What I would say was that the humanitarian corridor idea reinforces the idea of a lasting peace, because when you're feeding on an ongoing basis 750,000 people, a 3-hour window each day just is not enough. And also, let me make the point that you can get the food from our warehouses, if you're lucky, to our distribution centers in Gaza down this humanitarian corridor. The reason we want a lasting peace is because people who've been bombed for the last 12 days have got to leave their shelters, leave their houses, and go and walk through the streets and pick up their food from the food distribution centers. A humanitarian corridor in and of itself is not enough. People have to feel secure enough to leave their houses and go and pick up this food. And that's why we say we want a lasting and permanent ceasefire.
Can you describe the situation right now on the ground in Gaza?
Well, big picture, it's terrible. I mean, you've got 1 million people without electricity. You've got 250,000 people without running water. Every hospital in the Gaza Strip is running 24 hours a day on an emergency generator. UNRWA has enough food supplies in Gaza for days and not weeks. By anyone's book, I would say that's a humanitarian crisis. And while we, of course, will use to the fullest of our ability this idea of a humanitarian corridor, it's not enough. What we want is a permanent ceasefire.
And Israel saying that this is Hamas's fault because they are the ones who are firing rockets into Israel, and they are the ones who are embedding themselves in the civilian population in Gaza, that they're using Palestinians as human shields.
Well, I've not come on this program to defend Hamas. What I would say is we are the UN, we are neutral, and we are certainly not hoarding any of the food supplies. We condemn the rockets in the United Nations system. As Desmond Tutu once said to Ismail Haniyeh, these are an abomination. We've got to see these rockets stop. On the other hand, we've got to see the fighting stop, because if it doesn't happen, the humanitarian crisis that's already there can only deepen, in spite of the fact that there is this humanitarian corridor idea being established. We need permanent peace, permanent ceasefire, if people are going to leave their bombed-out shelters and come through the streets of bombed-out Gaza and pick up their supplies from our distribution center. It's a practical matter. The idea of a humanitarian corridor naturally reinforces the concept of a permanent ceasefire.
Christopher Gunness, I want to thank you for being with us, spokesperson for the UN Relief and Works Agency. Today he was speaking to us from Jerusalem. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org.